How do you analyze a supplemental jurisdiction issue on a civil procedure essay? Well, step one, you have to understand what subject matter jurisdiction is, and more importantly, how a federal court obtains subject matter jurisdiction under both federal question jurisdiction and diversity jurisdiction. So if you don't understand any of these concepts, you're not going to be able to understand supplemental jurisdiction, because on a civil procedure essay, before you can discuss supplemental jurisdiction, you have to establish that a federal court is already sitting in federal question or diversity jurisdiction. So if you don't know how all of this interplays and works out, no problem. I have videos that go over this in great detail. Pause the video right here, go back, watch those videos first, and then resume watching this video. But remember, in short, subject matter jurisdiction is merely a requirement that a civil court must meet in order to have the authority to hear and decide a case before it. Also, remember, I like to say there's 4 ways a federal court can obtain subject matter jurisdiction. Number 1 and 2 are federal question jurisdiction and diversity jurisdiction. Number 3, which is the subject of today's video, is supplemental jurisdiction, and number 4 is removal. Now, we'll come back to removal at another time, a different video. For now, let's just focus on supplemental jurisdiction. So how does a federal court obtain subject matter jurisdiction under supplemental jurisdiction? Well, supplemental jurisdiction allows a federal court that has valid subject matter jurisdiction under either diversity jurisdiction or federal question jurisdiction to hear additional claims that the court would not otherwise have the jurisdiction to hear if the claims constitute the same case or controversy. How do claims constitute the same case or controversy? If the claims arise out of a common nucleus of operative fact, which generally means if the claims arise out of the same transaction or occurrence, then they're going to constitute the same case or controversy, and the federal court is going to be able to hear that additional claim that it would not have otherwise had the authority to hear. Okay, I know that was a big mouthful, so let's just do an example first. Very simple, try to break this down and show you by illustration. So this is typically, well, let's just start with a very, very basic fact pattern. Okay, so you have one plaintiff suing one defendant. Okay, and let's say that this claim is being brought in federal court. Here's my horrible drawing of a federal court. And let's say that the plaintiff is a citizen of the state of New York. And let's say that the defendant is a citizen of the state of New York. Okay, so right now, we already have a lot of information about this fact pattern and can start thinking about subject matter jurisdiction with just what we have right here. So we know the claim is being brought in federal court, so subject matter jurisdiction has to be established. The 2 main ways we know we can establish subject matter jurisdiction are federal question jurisdiction and diversity jurisdiction. But because the plaintiff and the defendant are both citizens of New York, we know right now diversity jurisdiction is off the table. You remember, if you think back to my last video, I said for complete diversity to be present, we have to have every citizenship on the plaintiff side of the case has to be different than every citizenship on the defendant side of the case. Here, that's not the case, so diversity jurisdiction is out. So the only way the federal court will have subject matter jurisdiction to hear this case is going to be if federal question jurisdiction is satisfied. So let's go ahead and create a situation where the court would have federal question jurisdiction. So let's say that we have a claim. Let's call this claim 1 for copyright infringement. Copyright infringement. Okay, so right now, the federal court now does have subject matter jurisdiction under federal question jurisdiction. Remember, copyright infringement is under the U.S. Constitution. That is a claim. The plaintiff is alleging a claim that arises under federal law. So the federal court is going to have subject matter jurisdiction over claim number 1. Very straightforward. It doesn't matter, remember, what the defendant is doing. If the face of the plaintiff's complaint alleges a claim that arises under federal law, then you know that the court has federal question jurisdiction. So right now we know claim 1, federal court is good. This claim is all good. We have federal question jurisdiction. Okay, so federal court can hear this claim, no problems. Now, imagine that this happens. Let's say that the plaintiff wants to bring a second claim. So plaintiff fires off another claim. Let's call this claim number 2. And let's say that this is a breach of contract claim. Okay, so don't forget about claim 1 for a second. Let's just think about claim number 2. Does the federal court have subject matter jurisdiction over claim number 2? Well, again, we know diversity jurisdiction is impossible. Plaintiff and defendant are both citizens of New York, so we can't have diversity jurisdiction over the breach of contract claim. So do we have federal question jurisdiction over claim number 2? No. Breach of contract is a pure state law claim. It doesn't matter if the defendant raises federal issues. We know if we look at the face of the plaintiff's complaint, there are no allegations that arise under federal law. Breach of contract is a pure state law action. So the federal court, in a vacuum, has no authority to hear this breach of contract claim. They do not have subject matter jurisdiction over the breach of contract claim. But okay, the big but here is they may have supplemental jurisdiction, right? If you have valid subject matter jurisdiction over one claim, which we've already established they do, this court is sitting currently in federal question jurisdiction because claim number 1 arises under federal law. So supplemental jurisdiction says they can hear this breach of contract claim that they wouldn't have independently had the jurisdiction to hear if, remember, if claim 1 and claim 2 constitute the same case or controversy. If claim 1 and claim 2 constitute the same case or controversy, then the federal court is going to have supplemental jurisdiction over claim number 2, which it independently would not have had subject matter jurisdiction. So how do you determine if claim 1 and claim 2 constitute the same case or controversy? Well, this is going to be where in law school you'll learn the common nucleus of operative fact test, right? Your professor will tell you if the claims arise out of a common nucleus of operative fact, then they constitute the same case or controversy. But what common nucleus of operative fact really means is if they arise out of the same, let's draw an arrow, same transaction or occurrence. If claim 1 and claim 2 arise out of the same transaction or occurrence, then the claims constitute the same case or controversy, and the federal court is going to have supplemental jurisdiction over claim number 2. So at this point in the analysis, you need to ask yourself, does claim number 2, does this breach of contract claim arise out of the same transaction or occurrence as the copyright infringement claim? If so, then you're going to have supplemental jurisdiction over the breach of contract claim. If it doesn't, you're not going to have supplemental jurisdiction over the breach of contract claim. So how do you determine what same transaction or occurrence is? Let's just think about 2 fact patterns really quick here to illustrate this. So imagine that the copyright infringement claim, imagine that the plaintiff is Studicata, okay, my company, and we're hiring a person, it doesn't matter, to make us some sort of materials, to write us some sort of book for law, I don't know, some bar exam preparation product. And so we draft a contract, And in that contract, there's all sorts of copyright infringement clauses. It's a work for hire. Studicata wants to own the copyright, but hire a individual as an independent contractor to help us create some material. So it's a contract, but inside that contract, we have copyright infringement, clauses. And so let's say that the defendant, the person that we hire, goes out, breaches a bunch of clauses in the contract and steals our work and tries to sell it as his own. So we're suing for copyright infringement and breach of contract. Well, those claims are going to arise out of the same transaction or occurrence. It all comes from the same deal, the same transaction, the same contract. It's all in one package. That's going to be clear, same transaction or occurrence. So supplemental jurisdiction for the breach of contract claim is going to exist. The federal court is going to be able to hear this pure state law breach of contract claim because the breach of contract arises out of the same transaction or occurrence as the federal law claim, which is the copyright infringement claim. Now, of course, we could change that fact pattern around and say that the breach of contract claim is about something completely unrelated. Say that the breach of contract claim, involves a whole separate agreement. Maybe we had one contract for copyright and the work for hire stuff, and maybe a week later we had another contract that had to do with something completely different, maybe an entirely new work or some sort of non-disclosure agreement or something. Say it's a non-disclosure agreement we had our independent contractor sign a week later that has nothing to do with the copyright, okay? Then in that case, it's not going to be the same transaction or occurrence. That's a whole different transaction. That was a whole different occurrence. It has nothing to do with the copyright infringement claim. So in that case, for the breach of contract to come into federal court, for the federal court to have subject matter jurisdiction, this claim has to independently satisfy either diversity or federal question. And we know that it doesn't. It doesn't satisfy federal question. It doesn't satisfy diversity. Both are citizens of New York. So this claim is not going to be able to come in under supplemental jurisdiction. It's not going to independently satisfy federal question or diversity. So in that case, the court could not hear claim 2. If the plaintiff wished to pursue this breach of contract action, it would have to be brought in a state court. Federal court's not going to be able to hear it if it doesn't arise, if the breach of contract claim does not arise out of the same transaction or occurrence as the copyright infringement claim. That is supplemental jurisdiction. So on a civil procedure essay, the way this plays out is step number 1, you have to determine federal question and diversity. So if you're going to do a subject matter jurisdiction analysis, you identify that there's a federal court and a jurisdiction issue, or whether the court has the authority to hear and decide the case, and it's a federal court. Step 1 is always going to be to determine if that federal court has federal question jurisdiction or diversity jurisdiction. Once you establish that, if there's additional claims, then you can start thinking about supplemental jurisdiction and go through this same transaction or occurrence analysis. But you never discuss supplemental jurisdiction until you have identified that you have a federal court that is sitting in either federal question or diversity. Also, remember, there has to be multiple claims for a supplemental jurisdiction analysis to come into play. If you're dealing with a fact pattern where there's only one claim, you cannot discuss supplemental jurisdiction. I've seen this happen before. I don't know why sometimes this gets misconstrued, but to have a supplemental jurisdiction issue, by definition, you need a claim that it is supplementing. So there has to be a minimum of 2 claims for a supplemental jurisdiction issue to come up. So if you're reading a civil procedure fact pattern and you do start to see multiple claims, you can start thinking about supplemental jurisdiction, but still, you want to analyze federal question and diversity. You have to establish that a federal court is already sitting in federal question or diversity before supplemental jurisdiction can come up. So obviously too, guys, this can, the way that this can get more complicated, right? And where students start to have more and more issues is when you have more parties and more amounts of claims. But the key to remember is this baseline analysis never changes. This is exactly how you do it. I can add as many plaintiffs and as many defendants and as many claims as I want. The analysis is never going to change. It's always going to come back to, does the supplemental claim arise out of the same transaction or occurrence as the federal law claim or the diversity claim? If so, then you're going to be able to have jurisdiction under supplemental jurisdiction. If not, then that claim has to independently satisfy either federal question or diversity. So for example, just for a quick example, I don't even know how to draw this stuff. Okay, let's say there's multiple defendants. This is a common one. Let's say you have multiple defendants. So let's say PV, D1 and D2. And let's say the exact same situation. You have a copyright infringement claim going here. Copyright infringement, whatever, and right here you have a breach of contract. And let's say again, plaintiff is a citizen of New York, and both the defendants are citizens of New York. So we're just taking diversity jurisdiction out of this analysis. So this is the exact same fact pattern as before, except now we have multiple defendants. So the question is, we know that and we can label these claim 1 and claim 2. So we know that the federal court is going to have federal question jurisdiction over claim number 1. Copyright infringement arises under federal law. It's being pled on the face of the plaintiff's complaint. So we know federal question jurisdiction exists right here, no problem. So court has federal question jurisdiction over claim number 1, no problem. Claim number 2, even though it's against a different defendant, it doesn't matter. The same test applies. Does this claim number 2 constitute the same case or controversy as claim number 1? Which means, does claim number 2, breach of contract, arise out of the same transaction or occurrence as claim number 1? If the answer is yes, then the court will have supplemental jurisdiction over claim number 2. If the answer is no, then the court won't have supplemental jurisdiction. This claim will have to satisfy jurisdiction independently. So it doesn't matter. I can add more defendants. That does not change the analysis. You can add plaintiffs, defendants. You can do counterclaims, right? Or cross claims. I can draw the arrows in any direction. The analysis will never change. So let's look at a counterclaim. See what this does. So again, same thing. Just to illustrate that the analysis never changes, right? So you have plaintiff suing, sorry about that. You have plaintiff suing defendant for copyright infringement. Same thing. Copyright infringement. Same thing. And let's say that now, rather than bringing a second claim, the defendant is countersuing. The defendant countersues for breach of contract. Okay, let's call this claim 1, claim 2. Again, this is being brought in federal court. And let's say again, plaintiff and defendant are both citizens of New York. Okay? So again, complete diversity is automatically out. Citizenship is shared in New York on both sides of the V. So we know for the federal court to have subject matter jurisdiction, it's going to have to come from federal question jurisdiction. Again, copyright infringement, we know, arises under federal law. So claim number 1 is all good. Federal court can hear claim number 1. Now, claim number 2 is defendant countersuing the plaintiff for a breach of contract. What's the test? Do the claims constitute the same case or controversy? If the claims constitute the same case or controversy, then the federal court can hear claim number 2 under supplemental jurisdiction. How do you determine if claim 1 and claim 2 constitute the same case or controversy? Do they arise out of the same transaction or occurrence? If so, again, claim 2 is going to be able to be heard under supplemental jurisdiction. Now, the only nuance with counterclaims, and please do not let this, so again, the analysis, the meat of your analysis never changes. You're just going to identify that the federal court is already sitting in either federal question or diversity, and then you're going to ask if the next claim is arising under the same transaction or occurrence. That analysis never changes. Now, on counterclaims, and I don't know why this is, but it is, there's a term. There's a term, a word that is used to describe what this counterclaim is if it arises under the same transaction or occurrence. We call it compulsory. So if a counterclaim arises under the same transaction or occurrence, if that is the case, we call it a compulsory counterclaim. If it does not arise out of the same transaction or occurrence, we call it a permissive counterclaim. Why is it called a permissive counterclaim? Because if it independently, if this claim, this counterclaim independently satisfies federal question or diversity, then it can be heard permissively. But if it arises under the same transaction or occurrence, then it's compulsory. It has to be heard because we have supplemental jurisdiction. Okay, and on counterclaims, that's the only place you're going to see this compulsory or permissive words used. And please do not let that confuse anyone. The analysis stays the exact same. On a civil procedure essay, though, just recognize if it's a counterclaim, there's actually a word for it if it does arise out of the same transaction or occurrence. We call that compulsory. If it doesn't, we call that permissive. But the analysis never changes. So I hope this makes sense. This is how supplemental jurisdiction works out. Again, you can add as many plaintiffs, as many defendants. You can send the arrows going any way. I could add a plaintiff down here, right? And we could have cross claims. You know, there could be claims going this way or this way. You know, defendants could be suing each other. Plaintiffs could be suing each other. You can have cross claims, counter claims, whatever, right? Multiple claims going all directions. The analysis never changed. Just mark on your essay in the margins or whatever, draw out the diagram, identify what claim number 1 is, your federal question or diversity claim. Mark it as claim number 1, establish how the federal court has subject matter jurisdiction under that claim through federal question or diversity, and then identify claim number 2, whether it arises under the same transaction or occurrence. If it's a counterclaim, defendant is countersuing the plaintiff. Remember, if it is same transaction or occurrence, it's compulsory. If not, it's permissive. Cross claims, you don't worry about these words. Compulsory or permissive only applies to counterclaims.